In 1988, Katrina Kat Connors was 17 years old when her gorgeous yet volatile mother, Eve Connors, vanished without a trace. One day, when Katrina got off the bus after school, she immediately headed to her neighbor's house to inquire if her boyfriend had returned home. Mrs. Hillman, her boyfriend's blind mother, greeted her. Unfortunately, her boyfriend, who was supposed to pick her up at school, hadn't arrived yet. After a brief wait, Katrina left. Upon returning home, she found her father, Brock Connors, looking despondent. He asked if she had seen her mother, but she hadn't. Brock mentioned that the car was still in the garage, and no one had seen her. Despite Katrina's reassurance that everything was fine, she retreated to her room, a sense of worry gnawing at her mind. That night, Katrina spoke with her boyfriend, Phil, about her mother's disappearance. Speculating that her mother might have finally left, Katrina mentioned her long-standing threats to do so. The only oddity was that she had been sleeping in her bed that day. When Katrina asked where he had been, Phil said he was with his friend Thomas. Katrina expressed her desire for Phil to come over because they hadn't been intimated for over a week, and she missed being close to him. However, Phil declined, citing the belief that absence makes the heart grow fonder. Katrina suggested to her father that they should involve the police, but he was hesitant, fearing the attention it would bring from the neighbors. However, he agreed to consider it if they heard nothing by the next day, suggesting they might take a drive down to the police station. Katrina finds herself lost in the snow, calling out for her mother. In her dreamlike state, she sees her mother lying on the ground, staring at her. Confused and concerned, Katrina approaches her mother and asks what happened, only to wake up and realize it was just a dream. In a flashback to her childhood, Katrina remembers her mother attempting to curl her hair, but it didn't quite work out. Despite the failed attempt, they shared many happy moments together, bonded by their mother-daughter relationship. Her mother had affectionately nicknamed her Kat, short for Katrina, as she always wanted a pet. Throughout her upbringing, Katrina's mother had always envisioned her daughter as slim and graceful, just like herself. However, when Katrina hit puberty, her body underwent sudden changes, causing a disconnect from her mother's ideal image. During one incident, Katrina's intoxicated mother barged into her room, accusing her of having an affair with the boy next door. Dismissing her mother's accusations, Katrina firmly states that it's none of her business. Eve, Katrina's mother, confesses that she doesn't love her husband, prompting Katrina to urge her to confide in someone else. In the present day, at the police station, Brock recounts to Detective Sci-fi that his wife didn't leave a note, pack a bag, or take anything seemingly necessary for a departure. As the detective conducts the inquiry, Katrina finds herself admiring his physical presence. The detective hands Brock a calling card, instructing him to contact if any developments arise. Quick to seize the opportunity, Katrina grabs the card. While they're in the car on the way home, Brock confides in Katrina, revealing that her mother never loved him. In the flashbacks, Eve was a wild girl who eventually transformed into a domesticated housewife after marrying Brock, an ordinary man who lives a routine life. If homemaking were an art or science, she would have won a Nobel Prize. Once the house was immaculate and everything was in its place, she had nothing left to do but plan the emptiness of days to come. And gradually, the beautiful woman she once was became no more than a phantom, fading away in a snowstorm. Eve didn't appreciate her husband's efforts but felt contemptuous. Back when she was young, at work, she discovered he had game. Every woman there was into him, flirting with him, batting their eyelashes. She was stunned. The women thought her dad was hot. But to her mother, he would always be pathetic. Meanwhile, her father had his own drawer of secrets, her mom never coming, her dad playing himself off in the basement, pretending everything was fine, that they were living in a perfect family and a perfect life. In the present day with Dr. Toller, Katrina explains that she has been having weird dreams lately, driving through a snowstorm out of nowhere. She's been having these dreams ever since her mom left. Dr. Toller says that's not unusual, given the trauma and her condition. At her house, he is worried about Katrina, thinking it's too much for her to deal with on her own. However, Katrina urges him to stop talking about it. Instead, she wants to make out with Phil. But he declines, stating that his mom might freak out and her dad might go after him. That night, when they are hanging out with her friends Beth and Mickey, they talk about their sex lives. Katrina admits that Phil barely touches her anymore, and Mickey suggests she date the hot detective she is into. But she's not interested in screwing a 40-year-old cop. A few years back, Phil was literally the boy next door, but he was dull and stupid. She made fun of him, even earning a special nickname, Garbage. But then, one summer night, everything changed. Phil approached them and introduced himself to Katrina, Beth, and Mickey, and they all got along. A while later, he asked her for a dance, to which she delightedly agreed, and they hit it off on the dance floor. After that summer night, in a montage, we see Phil and Katrina happily together, indulging in fun whenever and wherever they wanted. Until one day in her room, where they had fun and entertained each other, and just like that, in the blink of an eye, her innocence disappeared. Meanwhile, Eve battles with maturing and taming her youthful wildness. When Brock is away, she attempts to look attractive, even catching Phil's attention. There was that night when she stumbled upon Katrina and Phil, where she intentionally distracted the couple. And then, one day, she tries to seduce Phil, inviting him to dinner. In the present day, Katrina attempts to contact the detective at his apartment while grappling with her mother's sudden departure, seemingly managing the situation with ease. Occasionally, she indulges her wild side by captivating the detective investigating her mother's disappearance. Offering her a drink, they engage in conversation, quickly noticing her seductive allure, and soon, he becomes entranced. Following his lead, they engage in mutual entertainment. The following day, Katrina confides in Beth about the previous night's encounter with the detective, admitting her enjoyment of his company. Beth expresses pride in her friend. In a flashback, while Katrina sleeps, her inebriated mother enters her room, asking about Phil's prowess in bed, leaving Katrina both perplexed and repulsed. She recalls how Eve used to gaze at her, as if she had stolen something precious. 3 years later, in the spring of 1991, Kat returns home from Berkeley during a college break, and her father is amazed by her new appearance when he picks her up. During their ride home, Brock shares some news with her. He's seeing someone new. Kat seems unconcerned about her father's connection with a coworker. During another interview with Dr. Toller, she confides that she's moved on in the 2 years since her mom left and telling she never comes back. She visits Phil at his workplace to ask him out on a date, but he ignores her invitation and instead urges her to stop seeing him, despite Katrina's desire to continue the relationship. That evening, she accompanies her dad to a restaurant to meet his new partner, May, and they both seem pleased with the introduction. To fulfill her desires, she meets with the detective with whom she's been having an affair. She confides in him about a dream she had involving her mother. Later, he suggests to her that Brock may have killed Eve after discovering her infidelity, a theory he heard from a blind neighbor, Mrs. Hillman, who can't see. He even recounts a story from decades ago. Kat dismisses this hypothesis and leaves. On her way home, she recalls a time when Phil and her mother, Eve, were preparing for dinner, sensing something between them. One night, while hanging out with friends, she shares the detective's theory that her dad killed her mother. This echoes a moment 3 years earlier when her friends Beth and Mickey had voiced similar suspicions. They remind her that they had proposed the same theory shortly after her mother's disappearance, which she had brushed off then as well. As Beth tries to place a bottle in the freezer, she notices moldy newspapers stacked on top. When they attempt to open it, their attention is diverted by the unexpected arrival of her father, Brock, who insists her friends leave, despite her protests. Later, Phil arrives, and Kat, suspecting him of having an affair with Eve, confronts him, demanding the truth. Phil vehemently denies any involvement. However, Kat's persistence leads Phil to reveal that her father knows the whereabouts of her mother and instructed her to ask him. Upon entering the house, she finds her father in a drunken stupor, lying on the bed. Kat has recurring dreams about her mother being lost in the snow. Determined, she starts to unload Brock's sealed basement freezer, but her efforts are halted when he unexpectedly walks in on her. She confronts him, asking if he knows where her mother is, but he vehemently denies any knowledge. Convinced by her father's words, Kat tearfully bids him farewell and boards her trip to college, her heart heavy with sorrow. Little did she know, that would be the last time she saw her father. It's later revealed that he is arrested after going to a bar and drunkenly confessing to killing her mother. He admits to transferring Eve's body from the freezer to a neighboring hill the night before Kat discovered it and then ends himself with a sheet in his detention cell. When Eve's body is found, it becomes apparent that it had been frozen for so long that it began to melt after being buried. The movie concludes with a flashback to the day Eve disappeared. Upon returning home from an afternoon of shopping, Eve is shocked to discover Brock and Phil in bed together. Phil quickly exits. She reacts with laughter at Brock's betrayal, which only serves to intensify his shame and rage. Desperate for her to stop, Brock pleads with her, but Eve continues laughing until his frustration reaches a breaking point. In a fit of anger, Brock grabs her throat and continues to strangle her until she loses her breath. For more videos similar to this, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. Thank you for watching.